Hello and a very warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on this special broadcast from the ZBC News and Current Affairs Desk. Welcome to Economics 101 that takes a look at all things to do with the Zimbabwean economy in relation and context to its contribution to the gross domestic product of our beloved land. Now, my name is Curtly Gwindi, taking a look today at a very special topic which I believe should be of interest to you. This is to do with the tobacco selling season, which is at the loom of a starting off today, and none other than Dr. Zack Murerwa is here in studio to make sure that we unpack more of these issues and more. Thank you so much, Doc, for joining us here on Economics 101.
You are welcome, and thank you for having me.
Most definitely, most definitely. Now, we do know that we are kicking off the selling season, and we are projecting that we are looking at a time in which we are going to project more sales with regards to this selling season. What do we owe this to in this 2022-23 farming season?
You are quite correct. We are going through very exciting times in terms of what is happening in the economy generally, in terms of socio-economic transformation, as we drive and we put concerted efforts to meet the strategic objectives of NDS1.
Oh, yes.
Agriculture is no exception. It plays a pivotal role in terms of the final drive towards a targeted GDP growth.
Oh, yes.
Now, when you look at agriculture, you now also need to zero on the critical, commodities that we have, and tobacco is one of them.
Oh, yes.
So we are having this conversation when the tobacco selling season is kicking off, an exciting time for farmers in terms of them getting, being rewarded for their efforts in terms of what they've put in the last few months.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
this is the beginning of the selling season as well as marketing season for this precious golden leaf, as you have put it. And most definitely we want to obviously unpack that. Some of the statistics are speaking very highly to an 8.5% increase and projection, which may have a lot of things that are attributing to the surge. What do we owe some of these things to?
There has been, I think over the last 6 years, if you are to look at on year-to-year statistics, an increase in the number of tobacco farmers, be they large-scale or small-scale farmers. And obviously, the opportunities that are being offered in terms of income generation to families of farmers, to companies, to merchants, to middle persons, and the like, they make tobacco a very viable industry as it is. So really, projections are about an 8.5 to 9% increase compared to what we had last year. We hope this will translate into foreign currency earnings that will also increase correspondingly in terms of what the nation is likely to get. Because I think, remember, we are targeting ourselves to have a $5 billion agricultural industry. And each crop must play a pivotal role in terms of the marketing. We have had challenges in the past in terms of transparency issues, in terms of the farmer, is he or is she getting a fair share of the final
Absolutely,
dividends.
which is actually where I wanted to just cut you off there and speak a little bit, or perhaps have you shed light on some of the unfair practices that are being said to have been happening on these floors on the ground, and perhaps how best you're going to curb some of these mistakes that have happened in the past that will obviously help us achieve this $5 billion agricultural industry without fear or favor.
Okay, let's look at it this way. Farmers are a critical economic entity in the economy of this country. And for them to go to farm and to go to the fields, they need to be supported in terms of inputs, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of what they require so that they come up with a good product. I think if you look at the efforts that have been taken by government in terms of presidential inputs, in terms of extension services, this has been wonderful. But I think what we have been lacking is transparency on the marketing side.
Okay.
All right. Farmers have got two options. Either they sell directly to the auction floor, or they go through contract farming, and they make that decision. And what is needed here is a lot of education to the ordinary farmer of the pros and cons of contract farming, the pros and cons of auction marketing. What is it that they get? Because what happens is everybody's in business to make money. Are you getting a fair value per kg of the tobacco that you have brought to the market? And we have had in the past the challenge of middlemen, who would then come in and whether or not the final price is market driven. That's where the issue is. Is it not determined arbitrarily by some individuals somewhere? I'm not alleging anything, but these are the issues that have come up. That at the end of the day, the averagely last year, for example, tobacco farmers got an average of $3.40, $3.60, depending on the time that they marketed their crop. But what happens is that sometimes once the tobacco has gone out and has crossed the borders, it's fetching a higher price of $6, $7 per kg. What is really happening there? In that regard, one would expect that the authority, which is TIMB, would come up with mechanisms to ensure that the average farmer gets fair treatment and a fair price that is incentivizing enough for them to go back next year and the following and the subsequent years. So these are the incentives that you need. You see, we are now driving an economy where consumption patterns and incentives are not based on money, government pumping out money. There must be systems driven. Are you coming up with a system, or are you coming up with a governance model which everybody trusts, and they know climate conditions taken into account? If they go to the fields, they will get something.
Absolutely.
So I feel that area needs to be perfected.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Murerwa, you've spoken very richly with regards to some of the things that perhaps every farmer wants to hear, and perhaps even our government and those in authority would appreciate to take notes from. And we are definitely here with Dr. Murerwa, speaking all things to do with the tobacco marketing and selling season that is on the loom and verge of a beginning now for the 2022-23 farming season. And most definitely we are speaking at length to do with some of the issues and areas that may interest you if you are perhaps looking at farming in a tobacco. Now please do stay tuned. This is Economics 101 coming to you from the ZBC News and Current Affairs Desk. Now, welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is a special broadcaster from the ZBC News and Current Affairs Desk. We are speaking all things Economics 101, in particular, the golden leaf. That is one of the crops that is the backbone of our country and beloved nation, Zimbabwe. And to do and unpack none other than is Dr. Zack Murerwa. Thank you so much for staying with us, Doc.
Okay, thank you.
And most definitely, we were discussing all things to do with the pricing. But we also want to discuss, perhaps even the nation would like to know about the timeous payments, because at times we do know that the marketing and selling can happen, but the real cookie then comes to crumble when the payments need to come out for some of these crops that would have been sold already. How best do you think that issue can be sorted with regards to some of the problems we've seen on the backdrop?
All right. It is against the background whereby the recent monetary policy statement made this positive announcement that tobacco farmers can retain 85% of their forex earnings, and the balance obviously being liquidated in RTGS to their bank accounts.
Oh, yes.
We are living in a digital world. And one would expect that we have systems in place whereby the farmers who would come and who have registered and who have booked their tobacco are timeously paid. What has happened in the past issues that are many to do with systems that go malfunctioning, resulting in farmers, camping at some tobacco auction floors. I think this is not proper at all. And what you need to do is, once you have got all your details captured, and you are...
Because I was going to ask, is that very normal to see trucks lined up and perhaps all these truck drivers are literally just parked out there for days on days?
Yeah.
Yes.
So what you need, these are logistical challenges, all right? And I think everybody needs to play a part. So when a farmer has made the bookings, it's known that the farmer is coming and has made the bookings. And all the details are captured in the system in terms of what they should do in terms of getting their money, and it's hoping that is then relating to banks, and then whether it's RTGS or a US dollar component. What has happened in terms of what has happened last year, I've just been advised that a number of farmers, still some of them have not received their payments as of last year.
Oh, yes.
Probably we should copy systems in terms of efficiency, in terms of what then happens, and then say probably maximum period that should be given, 2-3 days, a farmer gets his money. Because most of these farmers, you know what they do? Once they get their money, to avoid transport costs, they would like now to start preparing for the following season, buy their inputs, their fertilizers, their equipment, the things that they need,
and then move
now,
with their things back
and then move
at
on.
once.
Now, what then happens because of that gap between date of payment and the input, that disturbs the production process. So yes, that's an area that needs tremendous
Absolutely.
improvement.
And we've talked finance, we've obviously talked logistics, as you have rightly put. Perhaps let's talk about the environment concerning this very precious crop to our country. We do know that there is harm that can be brought about with regards to tobacco to our forests. Do you think that there is enough education around what kind of harm this tobacco leaf can bring to our forests, around just that general education to the everyday farmer?
Yeah, I don't want to put as tobacco being harmful. I think that will not be really focusing on the correct thing. What we need now is a shift in terms of supporting farmers, in terms of the curing process. What is it that they need? The energy inefficiencies, the environmental impact education, the supportive measures that would come from the regulatory authorities, the inspections, all that is needed in terms of the total support to the farmer. Because what happens to the small-scale farmer, if you leave him alone, what option does he have? Except to go to the nearest forestry and then get, you end up with deforestation, and it will have an environmental impact.
Absolutely.
There are best practices. We have got an impressive educational base of people who can come up with alternatives, and they need to be educated, and they also need to have
the
replanting.
That the everyday farmer can have access to this in our environment, with all things being equal in the Zimbabwean scope.
I don't want in economic terms, because we have talked about tobacco being harmful. It's not a new subject. We've talked about it for years. All we are saying is, what systems have we put in place to improve on what we have? Remember, this is the golden leaf.
Okay, absolutely. And let's talk beneficiation and value addition. As a country, where are we with the value addition and beneficiation of tobacco? And what are the benefits?
Not only tobacco. For some of us in economics, we have been saying, for how long can we all go on exporting our products in raw form? Let's take the example of minerals. We also take the example of tobacco as an example. We expect the farmer to grow the tobacco, deliver it to the auction floors, and have it processed here in Zimbabwe. In economics terms, we created what we call value chains. You create employment, you have tobacco processing, you have a fair price structure, there is transparency, and everybody sees what is happening.
Absolutely.
Now, what we have here is that transparency. I come back to governance issues. That transparency is not there because you don't know what the merchant does. You don't know what the middleman does. You don't know what the agent who is standing for the exporter does. And we really don't know where we know where the tobacco is going, all right, but we don't know the landing price.
Oh, yeah.
So ideally, this is what is supposed to happen. World markets are determined by the world economy. That should then cascade downwards and until the person is given a fair value.
Okay.
Now, if you don't have a beneficiation, a value addition factory, you are now dancing to the dictates of the final entity which is beneficiating the tobacco.
Absolutely.
And we want to localize that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Localization being the key word
Yeah.
over here. And most definitely it's an exciting chat in studio with Dr. Zack Murerwa. Please do stay tuned. This is Economics 101. Welcome back. This is Economics 101, a program that looks at everything to do with the contribution to the gross domestic product here in Zimbabwe. And today, what better way is it to do it as we are talking all things to do with the opening of the market and selling season for the product tobacco, yes, which is one of the crops that contributes in a major way. Dr. Murerwa, thank you so much for staying with us. And yes, we were talking localization just before we went for this break, and perhaps we can also just touch on what expectations that global prices, the favorability rather of global prices, especially with the current war that is going on in Eastern Europe. How best do you think we're going to see the global price? You were speaking about an inflated price once it leaves perhaps that $3 band to a whole 100% inflated price of $6. How best do you think that this current war that's going on in Europe will contribute to some of these prices?
Look, globalization is a reality. The dictates of market forces internationally ultimately affect us. I am happy that if you look at commodities like your tobacco, generally the trend over the last 24 months, notwithstanding the Russian-Ukraine war, they have been firming. Okay, they have been firming on the global market. Whilst they've been having some impacts in terms of impact in Europe, in terms of the energy crisis, in terms of this and that, but I think in terms of exports of tobacco, I don't think we really need to worry. Remember, government has entered into international engagements, re-engagements as its drive. And obviously they are securing markets. Continuously we hear of bilateral agreements that are taking place with a number of international organizations. Our tobacco, the major importer is China, and we have got others going on to Europe and the like and so on and so forth. But I think the prices, they should remain. I expect probably a 12 to 15% price increase this year.
Okay, and the rationale behind the introduction of blended inflation concept, perhaps you can explain this, because economic analysts like yourself are talking about things like a dual currency system,
yes.
as well as issues to do with it actually currently being operational in the country. So how best do you think we can explain or break down that rationale?
All right, let me explain it in simple terms.
Okay.
Over the years, your rate of inflation in an economy is calculated either on a monthly basis, resulting in month-on-month inflation. And then cumulatively is then up calculated on an annual basis, resulting in annual inflation. What has happened, we've tended to focus our inflation on our own domestic currency. And yet in reality, you heard it from the monetary policy statement, 76% of transactions now in the economy are in US dollars. And yet we are indexing inflation on RTGS. A concept of blended, you are mixing the two. You are blending the two, the figures, so that at the end of the day, you come up with a more realistic picture in terms of what is your rate of inflation on a blended basis. So you're going to see a change in figures. There are obviously complications that would arise downstream in terms of how arising out of the blending. How do you do your planning? How do you do, like we are talking about tobacco now?
Yeah.
How do we know we have increased by so much percentage?
Yeah.
But I think it's more of a realistic picture because we are under a dual currency system where, as we have said.
So in simpler terms, you're saying we have adapted as a country a multi-currency system, and also acknowledging the power of foreign currency. We don't know what is the future of our local currency.
And I don't want to talk about the power of foreign local. Okay, I think its jurisdiction, its nation has got its own currency, and it's determined by the transactions and the fundamentals that you have got, including the productive capacity that you have got in that jurisdiction. But the future that we are talking about is we have clear guidelines that are coming from our monetary policy advisors through the RBZ. We have clear guidelines that are coming through our fiscal policy guidelines in terms of where we are going. People talk about we are dollarizing, complete dollarization. It doesn't happen that way. There are serious pitfalls of total dollarization. So where we are going and where we are moving in, farmers, they can smell government is paying almost a proportionate into their nostril accounts of the user ratio in terms of US dollars vis-a-vis the RTGS.
And what was that percentage that you stated earlier?
85% will go to the farmer, to the tobacco farmer in foreign currency, and then the 15% will be liquidated in local currency.
Is this going to be at a bank rate or black market rate?
No, it will always be on the official exchange rate. We have talked for a long period about killing the black market, and I think that process, we are just along the right lines.
That's fine. That's fine. It's always an exciting conversation with you, Dr. Murerwa, and we do look forward to be hearing more from you, especially with regards to the time we're in, which is the tobacco selling season for the year 2022 to 2023. And we do know it's you said rightly that it's going to be a more exciting farming season for some of these tobacco farmers, based on the fact that the golden leaf has obviously increased its hectarage as well as its return by a very significant percentage. So thank you very much for joining us here on ZBC TV, and most definitely this has been yet another unpacking episode of Economics 101 that takes a look at everything to do with the gross domestic product as well as the general economic scope of things with regards to our country. We were brought in studio by an economic analyst, Dr. Zack Murerwa. Now, my name is Curtly Gwindi. Most definitely, it's always a pleasure to be on your screens, and from the crew behind the scenes, and of course from everybody who's been part of this production, it is a very good day, and God bless Zimbabwe.